I'd like to call this regular board meeting for Desert Water Agency on June 4th, 2024. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Some housekeeping. We ask that everyone in the room please silence your devices so they don't interrupt us during the meeting. And for those of you that are joining remotely, if you could keep your microphones muted until and unless you're ready to make some public comment. So for discussion and questions, I'll call on directors in the following roll call order. Director Gracia, Director Bloomer, Secretary Treasurer McKenna, Vice President Bowman, and President Ortega. And all votes will be conducted via roll call. And with that, we can move to item number 2, which is the Pledge of Allegiance. Would Director Gracia lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Of course, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And item 3 is the roll call. And Ms. Baca, could you conduct the roll call, please?
Director Gracia,
Present.
Director Bloomer,
Present.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Present.
Vice President Bowman,
Present.
and President Ortega.
Present. Item 4, public comment on items not on today's agenda. So this is an opportunity for members of the public to speak on something relevant to the jurisdiction of the Desert Water Agency, but not necessarily on today's agenda. We ask that you keep your comments to no more than 3 minutes, and as provided in the Brown Act, the board is prohibited from acting on items that are not listed on the agenda today. Ms. Baca, did we receive any public comments for items not on today's agenda? Okay.
No comments have been received.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public in the room or online who would like to make public comment at this point for items not on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to item 5, which is public comments for items listed on today's agenda. Similarly, we'd ask that you keep your comments to no more than 3 minutes. And again, Ms. Baca, did we receive any comments related to today's agenda?
No comments have been received.
All right. Are there members of the public that would like to make comments on today's agenda? Seeing none, we can move to item 6, which is our consent calendar. So the items listed under the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon by one motion of the board without discussion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a board member requests a specific item to be discussed and or removed from the consent calendar for separate action. Are there any items on today's consent agenda that any of the directors would like to have separated to discuss further? If not, I'll look for a motion to accept the consent calendar as presented.
I move we adopt item 6 as presented.
Thank you. I'll look for a second.
I'll second.
Thank you. So I have a first from Director Gracia, a second from Director Bloomer. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 7 would be action items. We'll start with action item number A. Request approval for 2024-2027 Desert Water Agency Employee Association's Memorandum of Understanding. Ms. Hopping, would you care to start?
Thank you, President Ortega, members of the board. This item is for the Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, between DWA, EA, and DWA. We do this every 3 years. We have a negotiation period of 3 years, and our current contract is expiring at the end of this month. So that's why we're bringing this to you today. We did negotiations as a management team with the DWA EA committee, and after several meetings, we came up with these changes that we're proposing to the MOU to bring to you today. These changes have been brought to the employees, and they have been voted on, and they were not unanimously, but very, very much pro-voting for this contract. There weren't very many negative votes, so that was good. So this is just a highlight of the changes. So we're recommending cost of living adjustments, 3 in the contract, 1 per year, which is what we have been doing consistently. The only difference is that we have a maximum set at 6% versus we've always had 5 traditional, or we had 5 in the last contract traditionally. They asked for it to be increased to 6. And for March, it would be a 4.8%, or for this year, in July 1, it would be a 4.8% increase based on the March CPI, which is the one that we usually use, is the March CPI account. The other changes, we revised our bonus program to add an ad pay program, so that would, for certain certifications that are listed in the program, employees would receive a certain amount per paycheck versus a one-time only bonus. So that way they would get a recommendation and a reward for having that certification throughout the year. The ABP increase, that ABP is our bank that is personal time and sick leave. Currently, we do it at 80 hours a year, which works out to 6.67 hours per month. We are increasing that to 8 hours per month, which is pretty industry standard to have 1 day per month for sick and personal time. The item C is commencing that people get the regular holidays at their normal rate of pay for regular work hours. Currently, employees that are working a 980 schedule, where they work Monday through Thursday 9 hours, and then work Friday 8 hours, and every other Friday off. On those days where it's a holiday, if it's a 9-hour day, they have to use 1 hour of personal time. The agency only pays 8 hours of holiday pay. So part of the negotiations was to change that so they get holiday pay for the entire day, regardless if it's an 8 or a 9-hour day for them. The item D is to have an additional 457 provider with a Roth provision. 457 is the government version of a 401k. We currently have that just with Lincoln, and the employees wanted an additional option, so management is going to look into that. And most likely it would be nationwide or VOIA, and that will happen as soon as we can get it negotiated with that provider. Some of the employees are concerned about the amount that Lincoln charges for fees, so they wanted another option. So that's why we're doing that. And then our bereavement policy, currently our bereavement policy is just 1 day of pay unless you have to travel more than 300 miles, then it goes up to 3. So we are recommending that bereavement pay go up to 3 days per incident, which is pretty industry standard. And then there was a new law passed in January that you have to allow 5 days for bereavement, which of course we would do if people need more time anyway, but this is just to codify it, saying that if they need an additional 2 days, they can do it with accrued time or with lost time if they need to. And then we approved to do a salary survey at the end of the year that we would bring to the board any results and changes at the beginning for effect January 2025, which we did last year as well. Last contract we did a full salary survey for every job classification. This one would be a benchmark one. So it's every 3 contracts we do the full survey. So this would just be benchmark positions. We did have a recommended change to our how we're going to do it, where we're going to compare top step to top step. Currently, we do middle step, but some places have more salary steps in their contract and ranges. So we want to make sure we're not losing people to the top step. And then we're going to change it so that we only do survey the local agencies that we've been basically our competitors that we've been losing people to. So we're going to change it a little bit that way. And the association agreed to those changes. So the financial impact for the changes, it's estimated to be $206,900 annually, not including the COLA, because that's the next adjustment that's going to come to you, the next item. Director of Science has reviewed the report, and the changes have been included in the draft budget. So staff recommends that the Board of Directors approve the memorandum of understanding between Desert Water Agency and the Desert Water Agency Employee Association from July 1, 2024 to June 30th, 2027, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Director Grasha, any questions?
Well, I have a concern. Now, they going from 5% to 6% seems to me a ripple effect that I don't think, as I recall, years ago, the 5% was put in place as part of an agreement that we would never cut salaries if the CPI, which has happened over a few times over the years, and cap it at 5% so that it would provide price stability throughout the system. Our 218 process allows for 5%. I think we're only in our first year of that. I don't know if you're assuming a 6%, but it seems to me that the ripple effect might be more than just us, being generous. There are other districts that rely on our, they're going to look at this and go, well, if they raised it to 6, we've got to raise ours to 6 as well. The difference is substantial when you try to set your prices over a 5-year period, which we've done. Instead of it being capped at 25%, I guess it's a 5-year 218 process. It would put it at somewhere over 30%, potentially, for salary increases over the life of that. And I don't know if that's all been considered. And I'm not sure I want to be the first one out of the gate to raise it from 5% to 6%. So there's another issue in here that, if you could scroll back on here. These are the things that you've agreed to. The other document in this file, I guess, was the things they asked for. Is that right?
That's the full MOU. This is just the highlights.
Yeah. Yeah, there was something in there that caught my eye as well. So I just want to have assurance from Ms. Sines that this has been fully thought out. Our promise is to our ratepayers to have structure, throughout the system. We're not trying to fix prices, but we're trying to, smooth these ups and downs, which obviously we're in the middle of one now. But according to this, we're at 4.8%. It could easily go to 5.9% next year, I guess.
Absolutely. So when we're considering between a 5 and a 6%, I think it's important to realize that it is not, of course, not a given 6%. It's only when the economy is saying that the increases are more than that 5%, or even as we've seen in recent years, we've had in excess of, I don't believe off the top of my head, but I can't recall off the top of my head, but they were around 9%, where we capped them at 5%. So we are seeing those, essentially, they could be considered savings, but there are other risks associated with that, of those and other costs that come if we do not stay consistent. When we think about the rate study, we did not say 5% every year for employee and carve out employee wages. We took long-term inflation factors, which at times can be in excess of 5%, and applied it on the total for all. It's hard to determine each individual inflation factor for every part of our budget and how we set our rate. So it's a long-term inflation factor, understanding that sometimes are going to be more, sometimes are going to be less, which is the same way that CPI works. Sometimes it's more and sometimes it's less. So we are not anticipating seeing 6% every year. We are anticipating seeing more around the 3 to 4% in the long term. So there is that smoothing factor that is built in because of how the CPI works. So that is a consideration that is taken into account here, understanding that we may be a little bit above 5% some years, but this year we are below. Last year we were below. The year prior we were above, and we capped it at 5.
Okay. Well, I just want to point out that, we're not taking the bottom out, but we're taking the top out. And the bottom is what would protect our ratepayers, and the top protects the employees. So it's it's not necessarily all that beneficial to us overall. But the bottomings will never reduce their pay if the CPI goes down. I mean, it's zero. And so that we're kind of going astray from that a little bit. But I also agree that it's, you know, not likely that over a period of 5 years that we'll have 6% increases each year. So, but there's no telling what will happen over time. So, thank you.
Okay. Director Bloomer.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
My only comment is that I really appreciate the change to the 457 plan. I think the options in it currently are meager. And I've mentioned that to the administrator of the plan, so it's good to see a change there. The rest of it, I'm fine with. Thanks.
Thank you. Vice President Bowman.
I have no questions, and I want to praise staff for their thoroughness and research on all this to not only ensure that we have fair pay, but we also don't lose key employees to other agencies that might have a little bit different compensation package. So thank you.
Okay. I have a question regarding, you said that it wasn't a unanimous vote. Did you receive any feedback from staff that perhaps chose to vote against the agreement that might have indicated what the issues were for them?
I have not seen the votes because I'm not privy to that.
Right.
From what I understand, the few that I was told about were very individualized concerns.
Okay.
And so we're going to be talking to the association to possibly address those on a one-on-one basis.
But there wasn't a particular trend that you saw?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, I have nothing else, so I'll look for a motion.
I would like to make that motion.
Okay,
I'll second.
all right, I have a first from Vice President Bowman and a second from Director Bloomer. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye,
Motion passes.
thank you. Item 7B, request approval of a July 2024 cost of living salary increase for DWA employees. Again, Ms. Hopping, please.
Thank you again, President Ortega and members of the board. So in the MOU that you just approved, thank you very much. It's a 4.8% increase for a cost of living adjustment. So as part of that, you have to have a board item separate from the MOU to approve the actual cost of living adjustment and the salary chart per CalPERS regulations. So in this packet, you'll see the new salary chart based with the additional 4.8% increase to the salaries. You'll also see in here a amendment to the general manager's contract because his contract states that he also gets the cost of living adjustment. So we have that. It's also on the salary chart, but he also has to have an actual contract amendment to reflect that. His contract also states that he's allowed a performance bonus, but Mr. Johnson has not requested that at this time. He just wants the COLA. So you'll see that in there. And the agreement, it does state July 1, and the way that we do it for record-keeping purposes, it's the pay period that includes July 1. So we have two different dates that it's effective because we actually do two payroll cycles. And that way we don't have to do a split payroll for every employee and do it twice. So that we've been doing that at least for 6 years. Since I've been here, we've been doing it that way. So I'd have the total cost is $478,000. It's been included in the 2024-2025 budget. Finance Director signs has approved the report, and we recommend the following: that you approve the 4.8% cost of living increase to the staff and general manager with effective date for the pay periods including July 1, that the board approves the monthly salary schedule reflecting the increase, and approve the First Amendment of the general manager's employment agreement to include the change to the base salary. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Director Gracia, do you have some questions?
No questions.
Thank you. Director Bloomer,
No questions.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
None for me, thanks.
Vice President Bowman,
None from me.
none from me either. So we would like a roll call vote at this time. Oh, a motion
Move the-
first.
yeah,
Thank
I'll
you.
move the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
All right, I have a first from Director Gracia and a second from Director Bloomer. Now may we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Now we can move to item 8, which are discussion items. We'll start with item 8A, which is a draft fiscal year 2024-25 operating general and wastewater budget. Director Sines, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. So you have before you our first draft of the operating general and wastewater fund budgets for the fiscal year 2024-2025. And on May 23rd, the Finance Committee met and reviewed the proposed budgets along with another meeting that we had previously. So we've broken it down a little bit to review in detail everything that's included within this document. I want to point out there are a few changes since the last presentation to the Finance Committee. So in quality control, we discovered a few essentially typos that had some significant impact that needed to be corrected. Notably, it's the increase in the state water project reimbursement due from Coachella Valley Water District. We were owing them $72,000, but we will be receiving a projected reimbursement of $768,000 due to an error located in the Delta Water charge projection. So it is a big typo. I put in an extra 0, and that's not good. So in the calculations, but that was located, and with that, it also means that the decreased Delta capital charge, because it was based off the same calculation. So that went from 2.3 million down to 1.8 million due to that same typo that was identified in that quality control review. And with that, it has a trickle-down effect where when you have a change to the expenses and how much you're using, it changes the reserves. So that led to an additional amount in the reserves allocated to the state water project of 1.3 million related to the cumulative impacts of those first two revisions noted above. So with that, I am going to move into the budget highlights. So prepared and before you is not only the budget, but there is a document called the Fiscal 24-25 Budget Highlights, and which goes through all of the detail between the comparison between last year and this year, our budget, and highlights the difference and provides the reasons why. And of that, I would like to go over kind of the highlights of the highlights for you. Okay. So first, we're going to start off in the operating fund. And operating revenues, the water sales revenue. And that is on page 1 of those budget highlights. So the major component that we need to deal with here in this year is that conservation has been effective, all the efforts, which means decreased revenues. So when we did our rate study, we based it off of 2020, 2021 consumption. And that was after much debate on what is our base year that we're going to use. And so we used that year because looking back at the historical record when we were doing our rate study, that seemed to be the most appropriate. And then we added an additional 5% conservation factor on that because we still felt it was a bit high and we knew that we were still continuing to push conservation. Well, conservation has been much more than what we had anticipated. And so with rates being set on a higher consumption and we are realizing much less consumption, that means our revenue is less based off of our structure being 30% fixed and 70% that variable water charge. So what has that done? We are seeing a decrease in water sales revenue projections for this upcoming fiscal year of $1.9 million. And then we also have the cumulative impact of this year that we're currently in, seeing that same sort of reduction as it's been presented to you each month, that we are consistently under our revenue projections and what we're actually collecting by about, I believe it's about 4%. So with that, we have a bit less money to go around. Those projected revenues that are in the budget of $41.2 million, it does incorporate the increase in the commodity rate for $2.44 per 100 cubic feet to 2.59, which is effective, proposed to be effective on January 1st, 2025. That's a 6.15% increase. And that 6-month rate increase will result in revenues of $685,000 as compared to if we were to have no rate increase at all for this upcoming fiscal year. The budget includes an annual average of 23,532 average active water meters with an average consumption of 530 HCF per meter. And the proposed rate increase would be effective January 1st, 2025, and it would be the second of the 5 that are in our current 5-year plan, adopted rate plan. Now, when I talk about those decreased revenues from this year and the projected decrease in revenues from next year, what does that mean? It means that we had to take substantial efforts in order to balance the budget. And that came with a combination of cutting expenses and cutting proposed capital improvement projects that were put forth by our department heads. And so we had to go back through that and cut some things. And so so when we came to the Finance Committee at our last meeting, we presented a balanced budget where we weren't dipping into reserves really at all. I think it was only about $60,000 into reserves. And so we felt confident that we could move forward with that, but also laid out to the Finance Committee the things that we did cut in capital and in the expenses. And upon discussion, the Finance Committee gave the directive to, hey, go ahead and put some of this stuff back in, most notably the pension plan accelerated payment for the unfunded accrued liability, because we realized substantial savings with that program, which then will help our rates in the long run. So those are some of the efforts that we took. So we are going to be, in this budget, it does recommend the use of reserves, just a little bit over $1 million going into reserves, but there is a definite payoff for it. And so those are the efforts that we took, understanding that our consumption is less, our revenue is less, but we've taken efforts to make sure that we can still provide the essential services that we need to. Are there any questions on that before I move on?
Director Gracia? Question?
So the pension payments, it doesn't seem like that, we're taking from reserves to catch that up or whatever that part of it is. It seems more like we were taking from the pension and bolstering our reserves. So I'm no?
The other way around.
Well, we weren't paying it, right?
I can either address it right now, but I have an explanation on it in more detail as we get a little bit further into the expenses and the operating
Well,
fund.
my point is that it doesn't feel like it, but paying the pension, I guess, sending them more money,
Mhm.
essentially what we're doing, doesn't seem like a bad thing. It's obviously a better way to go and probably should have been happening to begin with. So I'm not sure. I guess it's just a word game, really. But so.
I can go into that a little bit for
Well,
you.
I'm trying to wrap my head around whether or not, we allowed for those payments in the budget, what that would have looked like to begin with.
May I chime in on this?
Yeah.
So,
It's a discussion of unfunded pension
Mhm.
liability that is accruing all the time. And so the agency's been paying about $1 million a year towards that. And because that money is going in, the interest cost of that unfunded liability is going done. They charge about 6%.
Mhm.
So we have reserves in various financial instruments that make about 4%. So we're taking some of that money, $1 million, and putting it into the unfunded pension liability pot. And it saves us almost dollar for dollar. So
A little bit more. So the root of the unfunded liability, so we have pension is broken up into a couple parts. There's what's called your normal cost, and that's to say, okay, I work for 1 year for the agency, and for that 1 year, I earn X amount of benefits once I retire. But that's all based off of projections. It's based off of what did we project that we would receive in our in the CalPERS system? What will we receive in those investment returns in that is deposited this year for 10, 15, 20 years in the future, what you need. Now, when those projections are wrong, that's where you start to get the gap between your normal contributions and the unfunded accrued liability to get to the actual. So if when you first were depositing into CalPERS and they were anticipating that they were going to get 7.5% of returns over the long term, but now are only receiving 6, that 1.5% has to be made up somehow. And that's how we get the unfunded accrued liability. There is an actuarial report that is prepared by CalPERS each year that provides DWA what is the cost of your plan and how much have you funded through your payments that have come from the employees and DWA combined to fund that plan. So, and that determines what our unfunded accrued liability is. So, because of market returns in, the past 10 years, they haven't been as great as what they used to be. So, it's created this large gap. And so, we've been closing that gap by required unfunded accrued liability payments that gave us pretty much a 30-year payment plan to pay off that amount. But it was very long and it was very costly in how much we were going to pay in those interest payments for that amount. So about 6 years ago, let's see, I have it here. 6 years ago, we began, because of that great cost, we determined that, hey, we can save ourselves about $10 million by putting an extra $1 million per year to this, drastically cutting down the payment timeline. And we have already made $6 million to date, additional payments on top of our required unfunded accrued liability payments. And we have already saved about $8.7 million. So we're realizing a lot of savings. Might not be money in our pocket right now, but in about 5 years, when we pay that off, we will not have to make those continued $2 million payments that are required. So then that's when the payoff will come and we'll have those extra funds to utilize.
And we'll be making up for that at part of this rate increase that we're setting up for. Is that part of this as well?
So within our last rate plan, this extra $1 million was included. So at the time that we did that, we included that because it was an
Okay.
ongoing plan. Yes.
Great. And how do you get a 6-month rate increase instead of a full year?
The reason behind that is this last rate study, it was decided that it would be more beneficial for our customers or easier for our customers at the time of rate increase if we implemented it at our lowest consumption months, which are in the winter. So instead
okay.
of adding insult to injury, essentially, saying that your highest consumption months, which are in the summer, we're going to raise your rates so you see the full impact rather than kind of slowly ramping it up. That's where we got to the 6-month, is to essentially help our customers to ease into the rate increases so it's just not an automatic, the largest hit that they're going to see right from out of the gate.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bloomer?
Sorry. I don't have any questions, but with the rate increase, it stays at that rate for 12 months, just in 2 fiscal years. over 2 fiscal years.
Right.
Correct.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
Well, I want to comment on, how much work the staff has to do to create this budget. It's a truism that, everything the agency does affects the budget. So when doing a new budget, you have to look at everything the agency does. And I think virtually every employee is involved in the process, and it filters its way up to heads of departments, to finance committee, and eventually it ends up here. And it's complex, the highlights are 13 pages long. So I just want to pay tribute to the amount of work that staff put into this. And secondly, I want to say they worked really hard to produce a balanced budget, to the point where in our finance committee, we took a couple of items and put them back in the budget. Thought they made good sense. It makes a little bit of a ding on reserves in the first year, but it will come back. It's money well spent. I think the third thing, I've lost my train of thought. I'll pass on that. I have another one, but I forgot what it was.
Okay. Vice President Bowman?
No comments other than to echo Director McKenna's comments about our staff. And I also want to thank you, Director McKenna, for being on that committee and looking over it. You have expertise in that area.
All right. Thank you. So shall we proceed?
Absolutely. So the next item I want to point out is still in our water revenue is recycled water sales. The proposed rate increase from 65 cents per 100 cubic feet to 70 cents is planned to be in effect on July 1, 2024, according to the 5-year approved rate increase plan. And that will result in an additional $39,000 in recycled water revenue. It's minor as far as the revenue in comparison, but it is in relation to a rate increase that we'll be bringing to the board at the next board meeting. So I wanted to point that out. So now we're going to move on to our expenses. In the source of supply functional area expense, we have our water replenishment expense, and it reflects just under $200,000 of increases compared to the prior fiscal year budget. And that reflects the proposed replenishment assessment charge of $215 from $195 as it is currently. And that's an increase of $20 per acre foot, as was discussed at the last board meeting with the engineer's report, because that is the report that ultimately sets that rate, provides the foundation to set that rate. And so this is the charge that goes into Desert Water's water rates, because the operating fund is producing the water that the general fund is that has the replenishment assessment program and manages that. So this is our domestic water service impact for the water that we consume. Moving on to pumping expenses. As compared to the prior fiscal year, the maintenance of pumping equipment line item reflects a decrease of $432,000. Now, this decrease is attributed to well electrical control replacements at well 38 and well 38 pump inspections that were included in the 23-24 budget as one-time extraordinary expenses. Now, in our budget, we have a few different components. We have our capital, we have our regular recurring expenses, which we would consider are just normal operating budget. This is what it takes. We're not doing anything special. This is just a normal every year expense to maintain operations. And then we have what we consider one-time extraordinary expenses, which we put a little bit more scrutiny on at the department head level and at the finance committee level, where we're looking at everything line item by line item. Couldn't be routine, but it's not an annual routine thing. Some things are on a 5-year plan, 3-year plan, and others are just one-shot deals that we make sure that we evaluate, because they're typically high dollar impact. So we want to make sure that we're providing those extra eyes and scrutiny to make sure that they're really needed and they're not hidden just in a large dollar figure budget request. So that's how we see a lot of these ups and downs, by those one-time extraordinary expenses. For power purchases, it reflects an increase of $498,000, and that's based off of essentially our historical power use, how much we use. and also the anticipated rate increases by Southern California Edison. We're going to move on to transmission and distribution now. For maintenance of reservoirs, the maintenance and reservoir expense reflects an increase of $538,000, and this is mainly attributed to those extraordinary expenses that I was talking about for various inspections of reservoirs and recoding of Snow Creek Village Reservoir totaling $525,000 just for that one project. So that's an example of a few of the extraordinary expenses that are impacting our reservoirs for this upcoming fiscal year. For the maintenance of the Whitewater Mutual Water Company line item, it reflects a decrease of $276,000. Now, this is attributed to the Whitewater Headworks repair that was budgeted in the 23-24 fiscal year. And due to Storm Hillary, and so it was included in there, but due to Storm Hillary, the remaining Whitewater Headworks facilities were destroyed. We did not do that work. We are not planning to do that same work, but in the upcoming fiscal year, this shallow water well is planned to be re-drilled in 25-26 and will be budgeted as a capital item. So we're no longer doing maintenance work. We will now be moving that to capital, but that will be happening next year. And that's one of those items that we move to next year to assist with balancing the budget. So next I'd like to move on to the general and administrative section of the budget. And we have already discussed the pension and the root of where this unfunded accrued liability comes from. But I just want to note one more time that the Finance Committee had elected to use those reserves for retirement benefits, which was funded at a $5 million level. So there's already $5 million there. We are using out of the operating fund just over $900,000 to make that additional $1 million payment. The remainder of that is going to be coming from the general fund because a portion of our payroll expenses are over there. So payroll-related expenses and are taken from both funds in the same proportion of what they're expended. So that's why it's not a one-to-one. And to date, with us making $6 million of those additional discretionary UAL payments, according to the payment plan that we were provided, that very long payment plan I was talking about, we've already saved about $8.7 million. So the plan is working, and it is going to realize a lot of savings for the agency and for our customers. Next, I'd like to move to the water conservation grass removal category. Now, this expense line item has decreased $1.3 million as compared to last year. This decrease is attributed to the scaling back of the turf buyback program from 23-24 levels due to the decrease in water revenue as a result of the increased conservation. So this was an area where we had to utilize to provide a balanced budget. We fund this program, which totals just under $1.1 million for the agency. 50% of that comes from the general fund, 50% of that comes from the operating fund. So that is $531,000 is included in the operating fund for the budget for 24-25. So the total expenses for the agency, for the operating fund, is $1.4 million more than the 23-24 budget, at a total of $46.8 million for the 24-25 fiscal year for the expenses in the operating fund. And before I move on to the capital additions, are there any additional questions?
Director Gracia?
No questions, thank you.
Director Bloomer?
No questions, but just one comment on the conservation and turf buyback. In the past, we have augmented the budget if the demand, skyrocketed throughout the year. We've looked at it and have added more money to it. So there could be an opportunity to add more money back into that program if the demand is super high.
Great. Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
I have no comments at the moment.
Vice President Bowman.
None from me.
Okay. I do have a question, and this is really maybe directed more to Mr. Elliott, and that has to do, or it could be our Director of Public Affairs and Conservation, since she's sitting right there. Sorry, has to do with the trend of the turf buyback program in terms of this reduction in the funding for it. What do we anticipate that we might be coming back for an augmentation at some point later next year, next fiscal year?
Good morning, President Ortega,
Hello.
members of the board. I will actually defer to Conservation Manager Clark Elliott to discuss trends and what we can anticipate.
Thank you.
All right, and I don't know if this is on, but I figured I should try to find a mic. I think that it's very possible that there may end up being a request for an augmentation. I don't know exactly when that will come, and we are working very diligently to reduce as much rollover as possible. But there will be projects that move into the next fiscal year that will immediately take up some of what is projected to be in that budget. And there is also demand both from the state in regard to non-functional turf and the Making Water Conservation a California Way of Life regulations that I think is going to push more people to be participating in these programs even during a non-drought year.
So with regard to the funding that we're talking, we're talking about a significant reduction in our amount of funding for the program. We still have, of course, some of the funding left over from the city of Palm Springs. Does this 1.1 million, approximately 1.1 million that we're talking about that comes from the two different funds, is that solely based on our revenue, or does that also include grants?
So the level of what's included for the expense would be DWA's contribution. So if there is any grants that are brought in that are not currently on the books right now, and we're not currently planning to receive funds, that would be additional funding that would be available if those are received.
Mm-hmm.
So this expense is purely DWA's contribution to the program.
And are there grants in the pipeline?
So we do have two grants that we're currently pursuing. One is the Water Energy Efficiency Grant, and the other is the Small Scale Water Efficiency Projects. Those would be about 1.6 million over 3 years. So there is the potential to spend them over a longer time period, and hopefully that those do help assist that. We're also pursuing opportunities through the state, but they have not indicated that there will be less opportunities for grant funding through state. So all of our grant funding currently we're pursuing is through federal government programs.
Okay, thank you. Oh, did you have a question?
I have one question while
Yes.
Clark's still there, or Mr. Elliott, sorry. Do you have any indication from City of Palm Springs what they're doing with their budget as far as turf buyback? Have they added anything into their budget?
So as of right now, they're on a 2-year budget. So it is the $1.15 million that they attributed last year is still available. It may eventually run out at some point during the fiscal year, at which point we will ask them what they would like to do going forward. They have indicated, at least early on to me, that they can't guarantee any funding in the future, but they were very generous to provide it this time. So not pressuring them, I guess I should say.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. All right, shall we continue?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So moving on to the capital additions in the operating fund. The capital budget reflects a $5.1 million decrease as compared to the 23-24 capital budget for a total of $12.7 million. The agency continues to place emphasis on critical operational infrastructure such as pipelines and even transportation expense in order to adhere to the AQMD 1196 rule. So some of the major capital projects that are included in the budget is $5.8 million in pipeline replacements, $2 million in recycled water plant effluent reservoir roof reconstruction, $1 million for the Sunrise Park recycled water pipeline, and $707,000 in vehicle replacements. Now, moving on to reserves, as we've discussed already, there is a use of reserves at about approximately just under $1.1 million proposed in the 24-25 budget. This is a use of $190,500 from reserve for operations and $902,000 from the reserve for retirement benefits in order to meet the funding requirements for the 24-25 proposed expense and capital improvement budget, giving consideration to the decrease in projected revenues according to conservation. So before I move on to the general fund, are there any last questions regarding the operating fund before I move forward?
Director Grasha, any questions? No? Director Bloomer?
No.
No? No? All right. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the general fund. In the operating revenues, we have our replenishment assessment charge. That revenue reflects an increase of $337,000 or 4.1% as compared to the 23-24 budget. And this increase is mainly attributed to the proposed rack increase from $195 to $215 per acre foot. Moving on to the non-operating revenues, we have our property tax. Our property tax revenue projections are based on a reduced secured assessment tax rate of 7 cents per $100 assessed valuation in 24-25 as compared to 8 cents in 23-24. The long-term state water project tax rate projections have been prepared through 2035, and given the updated assessed valuations, so every year we are provided with the assessed valuations for our tax rate area and the planned state water project expenditures, a reduction to the state water project tax rate to 7 cents will provide the funding necessary to meet the agency's tax revenue requirements. So as you recall, last year we decreased it from 10 cents to 8 cents, and this year we are requesting to reduce that to 7 cents from 8 cents. And current tax rate projections, and I will be providing those charts for you when we bring it to the board for approval. We're planning that it'll remain 7 cents for a while, given the information that we have at this moment in time. Granted, each year we receive more information for the state water project, which then changes things. So as we receive more information, we put in our tax rate projections. But as of right now, we're looking at 7 cents here for a little while. For interest, our interest revenues, our interest reserve interest revenue reflects an increase of $1.7 million as compared to 23-24. And this increase is attributed to the increased bond interest rates that we are now seeing. As you may recall, a few years ago, about 5 years ago, it was very difficult to get any invest in anything that you really saw much of a return. And thankfully, those are now rolling off, and we have the opportunity to invest in much higher interest rates at around 5% for a 5-year bond without any risk of it being called because interest rates are lower and the company's wanting to call that bond back. So with our current investment strategy, we are now able to invest those maturing funds in much higher yielding in bonds. And so that is providing more interest revenue for the agency. So overall, our total revenues for the general fund reflect an increase of $734,000 as compared to the 23-24 budget. And are there any questions on the revenues for the general fund?
Director Grasha, any questions?
I don't have any questions, but it did occur to me, as Director McKenna said earlier, how much work it must take to put this together. When I was reading it over the weekend, I just envision you back in some office with your
Pretty accurate.
head exploding all day. And I thought, wow, how do they look so cool at meeting time and collected? So thank you for all the work you guys do, of course. That's it.
All right. Director Bloomer? And Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
Not at the moment.
And Vice President McKenna? Nope, nope. So we can proceed.
Okay, moving on to the expenses for the source of supply. For Mission Creek Basin Management, they're estimated at $522,000 for DWA's share of the maintenance cost per our agreement with CVWD. Now, DWA maintains the Mission Creek replenishment facility, but we do have a cost share component with CVWD. So this is just DWA's share. It includes the costs associated with grading the ponds for increased percolation rates. As you may recall, last year we had this included as well, but due to the Storm Hillary, we utilized those funds to repair that storm damage to the replenishment facility. So now we are getting back to that planned maintenance for those to increase those percolation rates. So it is a repeat item from last year. The next line item that I'd like to call out is water banking for the Metropolitan Water District. It's a decrease of $1.2 million as compared to last year. So this cost last year was the first year, well, this current fiscal year that we're in is the first fiscal year that we've seen this had to actually pay it according to our agreement with Metropolitan Water District for our cost sharing agreement. And in years where the state water project allocation is greater than 50%, DWA pays a portion of MET's average long-term costs to store water in their state water project's groundwater storage program. And DWA's Table A allocation for the upcoming water year is 40% as compared to last year or our current year of 100%. So we will not incur this expense for the upcoming fiscal year according to the current Table A allocation for the state water project. Moving on to the state water project expense. All state water project budget costs are based on the actual 2024 Department of Water Resources invoices for July through December 2024, and per DWR Bulletin 13223 Appendix B for January through June 2025, as the 2025 invoices have not been issued by the department yet. For the transportation OMP&R expense, it has increased $1.9 million. Now, it could be a question that you may have that, why is this increasing if our Table A allocation is decreasing? These are not variable costs. They are minimum, what the department refers to as minimum charges. So that's just your normal operation and maintenance and replacement components, which are not impacted by how much water you receive. So that's why we're seeing an increase of $1.9 million when we are anticipating to receive less water. Moving on to the variable OMP&R, this is the variable component of our transportation charge, and it is decreasing just under $2.1 million as compared to last year. And that is a direct impact from the decrease from 100% to 40% in our Table A allocation. So overall, the state water project expense increased $438,000 or just over 2.1% as compared to the 23-24 budget. Moving on to our administrative and general expenses. For water conservation, here's the other half of the budget. Same reasons. So we do see a decrease of $1.3 million, but the total program is just funded under just $1.1 million. But the general fund portion of it is $531,000. So that's this is the other half from the operating fund. So overall, the total expenses for the general fund have decreased $1.7 million as compared to last year, for a total of $29.4 million in the general fund for the 24-25 fiscal year. Are there any questions with regards to the expense budget for the general fund for the upcoming fiscal year?
Director Grasha, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Thank you. Director Bloomer?
No questions.
All right, Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
None at the moment, thanks.
Vice President Bowman.
None whatsoever?
All right, and I have none.
So moving on to the capital additions for the 24-25 fiscal year, it reflects an increase of $992,000 as compared to the 23-24 budget. So we have the State Water Project, we have our expense component, and we also have our capital component of the State Water Project charges that we pay to DWR. And for the upcoming fiscal year, it's going to be just over $8 million in capital charges for the State Water Project. We also have $335,000 for the Sites Reservoir Project, $550,000 for Lakes Paris Seepage Recovery Project, and $575,000 for the Mission Creek Recharge Facility Flow Meter. Moving on to reserves. For 24-25, the budget includes a proposed addition of $27.5 million to general fund reserves. These reserves are proposed to be added to the State Water Contract Fund and reserved for additional State Water Project water, with reductions to the reserve for operations and reserve for replacements. Now, those reductions are according to the reserve policy that sets minimum and maximum thresholds. Those are at the maximum threshold, and they adjust based off of the proposed budget. So we had to reduce those down and reallocate them into other areas. So the funds available to add to the reserves, they are attributed to additional tax revenue received in excess of estimated revenues. And this was the increase in the assessed valuation was more than what we had anticipated. Investment revenues in excess of estimated actual, in excess of estimate revenues. And also our actual expenses for 23-24 were less than anticipated. And that concludes the highlights for the general fund, unless there's any further questions that you may have.
Any questions?
I don't have any questions except to maybe ask someday, could we get a class on the Lake Paris Recovery Project? I'd like to better understand that budget number. Does that include electricity for that, or what? I thought that was a project from a few years ago that came to an end, and I guess it's ongoing. Is that maybe
Correct.
Someday maybe you could just give me a class on that.
Okay. I'll put that on
Okay, thank
a
you.
future topic discussion.
In the years I've been watching the meetings, I never did understand that one, and I just wondered what's going on there. Thank you.
Director Bloomer
No questions, thanks.
and Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
None for me at the moment.
Vice President Bowman?
None.
None from me.
Okay, so let's move on to our smallest fund, the wastewater fund. We have our operating revenues. The revenues are projected to increase by $124,000. Now, this is primarily attributed to CVWD's rate increase that is collected by the agency and then remitted back to CVWD. So we collect it as a revenue and then we record it as an expense when we send it out to them. So most of it is attributed to their rate increase. That proposed increase from $731 to $766 per EDU. DWA is proposing a rate increase as well to be effective on January 1st, 2025, and that will be an increase from $731 per EDU to $766 per EDU, and that has been included in the wastewater service revenues and will be effective on that January 1st date. And I would like to note that CVWD currently has an approved 5-year rate increase plan, just as DWA does. They are coming up on year 3 implementation, whereas we are coming up on year 2. And that sewer rate is scheduled to be adopted at their next board meeting on June 11th. So before we bring this final budget to you and our resolutions to adopt our rates, CVWD will have adopted their rates. So we will make sure that that is done before we provide it to you to request approval. So moving on to the expenses, I would like to highlight the wastewater treatment service functional area for CVWD. Wastewater treatment service expense for 24-25 is estimated at $961,000, which reflects that monthly service charge of $29.48 per EDU, and that is an increase from $27.10 per EDU. That is CVWD's current rate. And again, it is a pass-through charge, so whatever DWA is collecting, we are just sending right out the door to them. The City of Palm Springs wastewater service, so we have our two different treatment areas, and for the City of Palm Springs, that expense for 24-25 is estimated at $113,000. It reflects a monthly service charge of $20 per EDU and a fixture unit charge of $1.98. So these are also pass-through charges to the City of Palm Springs. They are collected and remitted to the City of Palm Springs, and there's no planned increase by the City of Palm Springs for the upcoming fiscal year. So that remains the same. So overall, the operating expense for the wastewater fund is increasing $168,000 or 8.8% as compared to the prior year budget for a total of just under $2.1 million for the fiscal year. And that concludes my highlights for the wastewater fund and the entire budget. So if there's any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any further questions, Director Garcia?
No questions, thank you.
Director Bloomer?
No questions.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
I had 2 points to make. One is the one I'd forgotten earlier, which is that as I'd be giving these monthly reports of sales 4% under budget, expenses 11, 12, 14% under budget, this new budget adapts to reality. It adapts to reality that our customers have done a really excellent job of conservation, turf removal, toilet replacement, the rest of it. And those savings will continue every year. So it's great news. I think that we've got less revenue and fewer expenses than we had before. The second point is just to pat ourselves on the back. If you live in a $500,000 assessed value home, our tax reduction last year saved you $100. And this tax reduction that's in this draft budget would save you another $50. And that will apply to every home, every business, every hotel, every piece of property in our district. I think that's a really great piece of news that we should get out there, that we are reducing taxes in spite of reduced revenue and all the other challenges we face. So just let's say that out loud. That's it for me.
Thank you. Vice President Bowman?
None at this time.
All right. Thank you for that, Secretary Treasurer McKenna. It had crossed my mind as well specifically with regard to the tax decrease and the benefit that it provides to the community at large. So with that, we can move on to item 8B, which is Board of Directors fee evaluation. And again, it's Director Sines.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. On August 1st, 2023, the board adopted Ordinance Number 76, which amended Section 1 of Ordinance 64, establishing compensation for each day of service by the Board of Directors. So this amendment fixed that compensation at $406.12 for each day of service until it is revised by a subsequent ordinance. Each year, during the budget process, staff does a board compensation and benefits survey that's facilitated by our Director of HR. And we present it to the Finance Committee in conjunction with the budget. So the Finance Committee has historically made a recommendation as to whether the item should be brought to the full board for consideration and discussion of any increase. So consistent with last year, the board, as we met at our May 23rd Finance Committee meeting, we reviewed the board compensation and benefits survey, and the committee has not made a recommendation as to whether they would like to propose an increase for each day of service, but rather requested the survey be provided to the full board for discussion to determine whether the board would like to proceed with a public hearing to adopt a new ordinance that would reflect a rate increase. So the survey results, according to the compensation survey that was performed, it was determined that the agency board director's fee as compared to other surveyed water districts range from $148.12 to $217.57 more per day of service. So 57% to 115% more than the other water districts. And that you will find in the attachment. There is the detail. So it is attachment 1. You will find the detail providing a listing of all of the districts surveyed and their compensation per each.
Could we scroll down to attachment 1, please? Thank you.
And so just to provide a little bit more information to facilitate the board's discussion, is according to California Water Code, the increase may not exceed an amount equal to 5% per calendar year following the operative date of the last adjustment. The last adjustment was effective on August 1, so that's the date that we're referring to. The Finance Committee, and then also the discussion with the Finance Committee was that they would, if they were to support a increase, it should be in the same amount as the employees to essentially stay consistent with the employees, to not be treated any better or poorly than our employees was the justification provided. So with that in mind, the current rate is $406.12. If there was a 4.8% increase, it would be a $19.49 increase to the rate, providing a total rate of $425.61. And if that were implemented, it would have a fiscal impact of approximately $10,000, increasing the projected agency-wide director fee expense from $216,000 to $226,000. So with that, I leave it to the board to discuss the item.
Thank you. Director Grasha.
I don't have any comments or questions.
All right. Director Bloomer.
No comments or questions.
Thanks. Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
Shouldn't we be discussing it?
Well,
No?
it does appear that people have anything they want to discuss.
Well,
So if you,
Other than making a motion to adopt the.
well, let's.
That's a discussion item, so.
No, we would make a motion to start the public hearing process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if we decide that's
Yeah,
what we
we
want
have
to do.
to do the
Yeah.
whole
Oh,
publishing it and have a public hearing and everything like that.
Requires an ordinance.
To draft the ordinance and have a public hearing.
Right.
is what
So
we're
we haven't
voting on
gotten there
today.
yet. So Secretary Treasurer McKenna, is there
Well-
anything you'd like to discuss?
Yeah. I mean, the number is beginning to look high compared to other districts. But every time I do this and look at it, I see, I go back to when it was first established, or even when it was recently established. The last time, there was no increase for 8 years. And it was $389 in 2015, and in today's money, that's $514. So obviously, some correction was needed. Whether or not we continue to increase it, I'm open-minded on that. I might even abstain, in fact, because I know the last time there was a comment that we need to be treated the same way the employees are treated. And but it's worth thinking about, are we getting too high on this number? So that's my comment.
Okay. Vice President Bowman.
Yeah, my comment and observation is that I think the other districts are not keeping up with the times. I feel that we are public servants, but we're not volunteers. We've been elected to do a job, and sometimes the job that we do, it demands a lot of time. And it's per day of service, it's not per hour or anything of that sort. We may have meetings that last 4 or 5 hours. We may have a meeting that lasts an hour. We may have a conference that we have to go to, that we give up our personal time to go to that to benefit the district. So I think these surveys are good, but I think the other districts are really lacking in understanding what it costs to have a director or directors that are engaged and committed to helping. So yeah, we are the highest, and I think I know I deserve every penny that I get. And we work hard as a team to pull these things, to move the district forward. I can only hope that other districts that might be looking at us that the directors will listen and hear. It takes money to run our own lives. There are board members, I'm fortunate, I'm retired right now. I could almost say, and I've had people in the political world say, I will give all my money back. And of course, that's very disingenuous, and it's demeaning to the role of an elected official or a director. There are some people that have young kids that they have to watch out for and take care of at meetings. Anyway, I can go on and on. So I think that the survey, while it's good, it's reflective that all the other agencies are behind understanding the requirements of a quality leader and director. And that's why mostly you have a bunch of old retired guys like me. And I'd like to see younger people.
Okay, thank you. My comments and observations. I don't necessarily disagree with Vice President Bowman about the per diem rate that the other water agencies that we're comparing ourselves to might be underwhelming, and maybe not fully reflective of the kind of work that those directors do. Noting that, for example, if I'm not mistaken, that the rate that's shown here, for example, for Mission Springs Water District has significantly increased from the last time we did the survey, which I think points to the direction perhaps that Vice President Bowman was alluding to, or had mentioned. I still am a little concerned about the fact that our rate stands out so much higher than the other agencies. Notwithstanding the fact that we might think that, or that there might be a feeling that the rates that other agencies use as compensation might be under whatever the word might be. I'm still a little concerned about the optics of that, and I think that was reflective in the vote last year when Director Bloomer and I voted against the rate increase. Even though it had not, as Secretary Treasurer McKenna had pointed out, had not happened in about 8 years as far as the cost of living increase. As it relates to the comment about we should be treated the same as employees, I might actually point out, even though this chart says same as offered to employees with regard to other benefits, that's not exactly true. That is true with regard to healthcare, and then we are allowed to participate in the 457 program, but it's my understanding that employees also receive, after 2 years of participation, receive a contribution from the water agency, which directors are not receiving who choose to participate. So it's a little bit misleading, but that's sort of splitting hairs, I guess, at this point in the bigger picture. With regard to a public hearing, I would not support that at this time, but certainly would if there were a reason to take this from a discussion item into an action item for the purpose of entertaining a motion to do so. I would be open to that as well. So we'll leave it there unless there's a motion or unless there's a movement on the rest of the board to move to taking this from a discussion to an action item with regard to a public hearing.
Mr. President, I move that we move ahead with scheduling a public hearing to hash this out, and I'll save my comments for that date.
Okay.
If it gets 3 votes.
Okay, so there's a motion to proceed with a public hearing with regard to this matter. Is there a second for that?
I'll second it.
All right. So I have a first from Director Gracia and a second from Secretary Treasurer McKenna. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Nay.
Motion passes 4-1.
Thank you. So we can move to item 8C, which is Water Year 2022-23 Sustainable Groundwater Management Act annual report for Indio, Mission Creek, and San Gorgonio Pass subbasins, parentheses PowerPoint. Ms. Rapala, please. Thank you.
Good morning, President Ortega, members of the board. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act requires groundwater sustainability agencies, or GSAs, in high and medium priority subbasins to develop and implement groundwater sustainability plans or alternative plans for their basins or subbasins. These plans are meant to provide guidance on how each basin will achieve long-term sustainability. Following adoption of these plans, SGMA requires that GSAs submit annual reports by April 1st of each year to the Department of Water Resources. These annual reports provide a year-end review, if you will, of groundwater sub-basin conditions and any progress made on management actions and projects that are identified in those plans. In order to meet the requirements under SGMA, the Desert Water Agency, along with other GSAs throughout the subbasins, submitted the water year 2022-2023 SGMA annual reports to the Department of Water Resources by that April 1st deadline. As this is an informational presentation only, there is no fiscal impact for this particular item, and no legal review was necessary. So again, we'll be going over these water year 22-23 annual reports. Just keep in mind this is meant to be a high-level overview, so we're not going through the nuts and bolts details of every report. Otherwise, we'd be here all day into the nighttime hours, and I don't think we want that. So I think so. So if I pique your interest during this presentation and you want to take a deeper dive into those reports, I did include the subbasin websites in the presentation, so you can find the full reports on each of those websites, the alternative plans, the GSPs, so knock yourself out if you really want to do that. Okay? Let's see if this works. I'll just have you, do you want to just do it and I'll let you know? There you go. Okay. So again, SGMA requires us to submit these annual reports by April 1. I'm sorry, can you go to the previous one? That was my fault. There you go. Okay, so just an overview of this presentation, recap of what SGMA is, what it requires us to do, and then we'll go over that high-level overview of each annual report. So we'll start with Indio, we'll move on to Mission Creek, and then we'll end with San Gorgonio Pass. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so SGMA requires us to submit these reports. You can either do a GSP if you don't have an existing report or a plan in place. If you do have an existing management plan already in place for your basin, you can submit that as an alternative plan. In the case of Indio and Mission Creek subbasins, those have alternative plans. San Gorgonio has a GSP. Okay, Desert Water Agency is the GSA or one of the GSAs for Indio, Mission Creek, and San Gorgonio Pass subbasins. In terms of annual reporting requirements under SGMA, we are required to submit those reports by April 1 to the Department of Water Resources. For the reports that we just submitted, we are looking at a time frame from October 1 of 2022 through September 30th of 2023. And these annual reports are meant to provide a detailed description as well as graphical representations of the groundwater conditions for the subbasin in that prior water year. Next slide, please. In terms of organization for these annual reports, they would include a background of what SGMA is, the subbasin setting for each of the subbasins. We include data on groundwater elevation for the water year, groundwater production, surface water production, total water use, groundwater balance or change in storage, and then there's always a brief description of all of the projects and management actions identified in those GSPs or alternative plans, along with a description of any progress that we've made on those projects throughout the water year. Next slide, please. So first, we will go over an overview of the water year 22-23 annual report for the Indio Subbasin. The Indio Subbasin team includes project consultants, Todd Groundwater, along with the Indio Subbasin GSAs, Coachella Valley Water District, Coachella Water Authority, Desert Water Agency, and the Indio Water Authority. So if you look at the figure to the right, it's a color-coded map showing those GSA boundaries. Desert Water is in blue, CVWD is in yellow, Indio is the pink section, and then CWA, or Coachella Water Authority, is the green. Next slide. Jumping right into the groundwater elevation data. During this water year, we collected data from over 365 wells throughout the subbasin. That data was used to create contour maps as well as change in storage maps for the annual report. Of those wells, 57 were identified in the 2022 alternative plan update as key wells that would be used to track groundwater sustainability within the basin. Minimum thresholds based on the observed low groundwater elevation levels were set for each of those 57 key wells. And then what we did was we went through and took the current groundwater elevations for the water year and compared them against those minimum thresholds. Happy to say that in all cases, the current groundwater levels were above the minimum thresholds. One item to note is that there was one key well on the list that was not accessible this water year, so we replaced that with an alternate nearby well. So it's now a new well that's been added, to the key well list to replace that well. If you look at the map to the right, you can see the location of all 365 wells spread out throughout the subbasin. The green dots that you see represent those 57 key well locations. Desert Water Agency has 4 key wells in the Indio subbasin, and we provided data on 36 total wells for the water year. Next slide. In terms of groundwater production in the Indio subbasin, the majority of sources are metered, with the exception of minimal pumpers. So those would be any private wells that produce in CV service area less than 25 acre-feet per year, and Desert Water Agency's service area less than 10 acre-feet per year. In total, we saw 258,863 acre-feet of groundwater production. Approximately 82% of that went to urban use, 16.5% to agricultural use, and then the remaining, just over 1%, was split between industrial use and those undetermined minimal pumpers and tribal trust lands. This total does represent an 8% decrease in groundwater pumping from the prior water year. So something to keep in mind there is we did have a wet year in 22-23 compared to the prior year where we were still in drought. So more moist soil conditions, maybe less likely needing to irrigate as much. So that's why you're seeing these decreases. The map at right shows areas of groundwater production. So those dark green to blue areas are the areas of higher groundwater production. Typically, those are urban areas, so a higher population density, you would expect to see more groundwater production happening there. Next slide, please. In terms of surface water diversion for direct use, Desert Water Agency is the only water agency, or GSA, within the Indio subbasin that diverts surface water for direct use. We divert stream water from Snow Creek, Chino Creek, Falls Creek, which is not currently in operation, and Whitewater Canyon, which produces non-potable water for irrigation purposes. In total, we saw 548 acre-feet of surface water diverted for direct use in our service area. Next slide, please. In terms of imported water, there's really 2 ways in which this water is used. CVWD delivers Coachella Canal water directly to their customers for use either for agricultural purposes, which is about 85% of their total, and urban use, which is about 15%. So in total, we saw 258,416 acre-feet of direct Coachella Canal deliveries to CV customers. The other way we use imported water, as we know, is to recharge our aquifers. We saw 180,710 acre-feet of imported Colorado River water delivered to our 3 recharge facilities in the subbasin. I would say one really important thing to note here is the drastic difference that we saw this year versus the prior water year. So in 2023, to Whitewater in particular, we saw 168,594 acre-feet of deliveries. Last year, we had only about 19,000 acre-feet. So that's a 9-fold increase. Again, really benefited from that wet year, more water available to deliver. I would say that this really highlights the need for us to be able to accept that water when it's available, because by no means is it guaranteed from year to year. We could have a very wet year one year and an extremely dry year the next. Next slide, please. Recycled water production, we saw a total of 13,338 acre-feet of recycled water produced in the subbasin. 100% of that went to urban use, so we're talking golf courses, athletic fields, parks, green spaces, that sort of thing. There are 3 reclamation plants in the subbasin that produced that recycled water this year. Desert Water Agency's recycled water facility provided just over 3,100 acre feet, with the remaining amount going to or being produced from CVWD's 2 recycled water facilities. Next slide, please. In terms of total water use for water year 22-23, what we're looking at here is supply versus demand. So who's using the water and where are we getting it from? On the demand side, we see a pretty even split between agricultural and urban demand, with a small amount of industrial demand and that undetermined use, which again is those minimal pumpers and tribal trust lands. On the supply side, again, it's a fairly even split between canal water direct deliveries in CV's area and groundwater production throughout the subbasin. There is that small amount of recycled water production going on, as well as the surface water that's diverted in DWA's service area. And in total, just over 531 acre feet of demand in the subbasin. Next slide, please. When we're talking about change in groundwater storage, this is what is going into the subbasin versus what's leaving the subbasin. So this is where we really look at the overall groundwater balance and change in storage. Did we put more in than we took out, or vice versa? And this is probably my favorite slide on this presentation this year, because overall we saw a significant positive change in groundwater storage for 22-23. Again, we had a wet year in the winter especially, and that did a few things for us where this is concerned. This year, the natural infiltration was just over 97,000 acre feet. Last year, it was only about 21,000 acre feet. So almost a 4 to 5-fold increase. In terms of groundwater replenishment, this year we had just over 180,000 acre feet. Last year, it was only about 67,000 acre feet. So about a 3-fold increase in deliveries. Again, wet year, more water available, we take it when we can get it. And then on the outflow side, you did see that approximate 8% decrease in groundwater pumping. So overall, the positive change in storage was just over 129,000 acre feet. Next slide. And when we're looking at whether or not we're sustainably managing a sub-basin, we really want to look at the long-term average, so not necessarily the year-to-year, because we know there's fluctuations that happen there. So on this slide, we're really looking at our 10-year average and our 20-year average, and what does that look like? Our 10-year running average shows a positive trend since 2017. Our 20-year running average shows a positive trend from 2009. So that 2009 year is when we observed those low groundwater levels. So we're looking at what we've done since that time. If you look at the map to the right, you can see the basin. The cooler colors of greens and blues represent that positive change in storage over time. The oranges to reds represent a negative change in storage over time. So you can see the overwhelming majority of the subbasin is those blue and green colors, which is a good thing, because that means that we're improving the groundwater storage or we're adding to it. And one highlight I would say this year is that for the first time in water year 22-23, that 20-year running average went into the positive territory. So we crossed that neutral line and went into the positive, which is a really great thing for us. And this is a great indicator that the Indio subbasin is being sustainably managed. Next slide, please. Every year, as I said, we go through a detail of every project and management action identified in the subbasin plan or alternative plan. There's about 30 projects listed in this plan for Indio, and they're split into 4 different categories based on benefit that's recognized. So in the area of water conservation, we're seeing continued education and outreach through our regional collaborative effort, that CV Water Counts program. I know our conservation and outreach team works very hard to have a presence in the community and really educate our customers and the public on the importance of conservation. We're seeing continued participation in the indoor and outdoor incentive programs, as we talked about in the budget and Clark alluded to. So these are really, I would say, practical ways for us to conserve water, for our customers to take an active role in that process. Very popular programs, and we have received both state and federal grant funding for these programs, which have really helped us stretch our dollars and make this available to more of our customers. We're also seeing something fairly new in the area of water conservation, which is development of those water use efficiency standards. That's something that I know our conservation team has been trying to wrap their heads around in terms of timeframes, requirements, all the different numbers. We have taken advantage of the opportunity to provide comments whenever we have a chance, whenever they come out with new text. So this is an ongoing process and something that we are, like I said, just really trying to get a better feel for as we move forward. In the area of water supply development, we do see those contributed funds, as Esther talked about, to the long-term storage and supply projects, such as Lake Perry Seepage, Sites Reservoir, and Delta Conveyance. In the category of source substitution and replenishment, we have several recycled water expansion projects taking place throughout the sub-basin. Desert Water Agency is working with the city on an expansion project to bring recycled water to one of the parks in the area. And then we did receive our approved right-of-way grant for operation of the Whitewater River Groundwater Recharge Facility from the BLM. A great thing for us because it allows us to continue operation of this facility in its current capacity, as well as receiving up to the capacity of the facility based on current agreements. Really important thing because, as I said, water is not guaranteed from one year to the next. So we want to be able to accept deliveries when they're available to us. And then in terms of the water quality protection, we have continued coordinated implementation of the Coachella Valley Salt and Nutrient Management Plan and the associated groundwater monitoring program work plan. This is something that you'll see continue to show up on this presentation just because it's a long-term project. So we expect the CVS and MP to be completed sometime in 2027. One thing I would highlight with regard to the groundwater monitoring program is that DWA and other agencies have partnered with the Department of Water Resources through their Technical Support Services program to construct additional monitoring wells in the area to help fill data gaps that were identified in this CVS and MP work plan and groundwater monitoring program. We actually have one well under construction right now, first of 3 that we plan to construct. And this is really a great opportunity for us to take advantage of a program and funding that's available through DWR to really minimize out-of-pocket costs for us, since these are wells that we need to install. It's really a great opportunity. Next slide, please. If you would like more information on the Indio Sub-Basin Annual Report, you can visit the Sub-Basin website at www.indiosubbasinsigma.org. Next slide. Do we have any questions on the Indio report before we jump into the next report?
Thank you. Director Grasha.
Excellent report. Thank you very much. I don't have any questions or comments.
Director Bloomer.
No questions.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
None from me.
Okay. Vice President Bowman.
Do we have this report on our website, or will it be on our website?
I don't believe it's on our website. It's on the Sub-Basin website. If you'd like to, I can certainly have a conversation about that. I'm not sure if,
I believe it might be linked through, we link out to that website. so
If we link out, that's fine.
there we go.
Yeah, thank you.
I have none, so we can go to the next, please.
All right, then moving on, we will jump right into the Sigma Annual Report for water year 22-23 for the Mission Creek Subbasin. Next slide. The Mission Creek Subbasin team is composed of project consultants, WSP, Mission Creek Subbasin's GSAs, Coachella Valley Water District and Desert Water Agency, and the Mission Creek Subbasin Management Committee, which includes CVWD, DWA, and Mission Springs Water District. So in the figure at right, you can see the GSA boundaries for that subbasin. Desert Water Agency is the upper portion, excuse me, in that salmon color. CVWD is the lower portion in the blue color. Next slide. In terms of groundwater elevation data for the Mission Creek Subbasin, the 2022 Alternative Plan Update identified 9 key wells that would be used to track groundwater sustainability in the subbasin. Similar to Indio, we determined minimum thresholds for each of these key wells based on that observed low water level. We compared our current groundwater elevations for each well against those minimum thresholds, and again, in all cases, the current levels were above the minimum thresholds, which is a great sign. We did collect data from 9 additional wells throughout the subbasin and used this to supplement those key well data to create the contour maps as well as the change in storage maps. The figure at right shows the location of all wells in the subbasin. Those color-coded targets that you see are the 9 key wells. Desert Water Agency has 1 key well in this subbasin. That's the little green dot somewhere near the middle of the map. Next slide, please. In terms of groundwater production, we saw a total of 13,489 acre-feet of production from 24 wells as well as minimal pumpers in the subbasin. Approximately 90% of that went to urban use. The other 10% was split between agricultural, industrial, and/or undetermined use. And this does represent a decrease in production as well. From the prior water year, it's about 5% decrease. Of this total, 6,146 acre-feet was exported to Desert Hot Springs Subbasin to meet demands. 48 acre-feet was exported to Granite Hill sub-area, which is in the Indio Subbasin, to meet demands. I know we had a comment or a question about this slide last year, so I just want to remind you guys that just because the state designates these as separate subbasins does not mean they're separate service areas. Also does not mean that they're separate distribution systems. So Mission Springs might have customers on this side of the line and this side of the line, right, that are technically in different subbasins, but they're served through the same distribution system. So when you're seeing these numbers, these are really the customers within those water district service areas that just happen to be on the other side of the line.
A question?
Yes, absolutely.
Desert Hot Springs Subbasin has always been understood by me to be the hot water
Mhm.
subbasin. So when you say 6,000 acre-feet were exported to that subbasin, what does that mean?
And I think that's what I'm talking about when I say that the distribution system really spans both subbasins because it's all one service area. So the wells are located in Mission Creek Subbasin, kind of in the middle, but the pipelines go north and south, right? So you're taking the water from the wells, which happen to be located here, and you're moving it to your customers all over the place. So you've got some customers up north that are in that Desert Hot Springs Subbasin
Yeah,
area.
that would be my personal home. Yep.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, it almost on first read, it almost implies that we're putting water into the subbasin.
Exactly. And
And perhaps in a sense through percolation of septic tanks, you are, or we are, but okay, you've answered it. Thank you.
perfect, you're welcome. I know, unfortunately, the technical wording is not always what's actually happening. So it is good to explain it a little bit in more practical terms, I would say. Next slide, please. Thank you. In terms of surface water production, there is no stream diversion for direct use in Mission Creek Subbasin. What we do have is imported water deliveries to our recharge facility, as well as wastewater percolation, which you alluded to. So we saw 5,276 acre-feet of imported water deliveries to Mission Creek Recharge Facility. By comparison, last year there were none. So again, wet year, more water available. This is a positive for us. We want to put some water back into that subbasin. We also saw 2,254 acre-feet of wastewater that was treated and then percolated back down into the aquifer. And this happened at the 2 facilities within Mission Springs service area. Next slide, please. In terms of change in groundwater storage, again, we're looking at what we're putting into the aquifer and what we're taking out. The overall total this year is a negative, but it's a very small negative, so I would almost consider it to be a neutral for a couple of reasons, which I'll go into. The biggest difference that you're seeing in your in versus outs this year versus last year are those imported water deliveries. So again, last year there were no deliveries. This year, just over 5,200. Last year's total change in storage was a negative 6,013. This year it's a negative 341. And what I will just mention here is that there are some of these figures that are based on models, so they're long-term averages and not necessarily actual numbers. One of those would be the natural infiltration. So when I say it's a small negative, it could be a positive, right? We don't know because we used an average here. Okay, next slide, please. In terms of long-term change in storage, again, we want to look at that long-term to see whether or not we're sustainably managing this subbasin. Since 2008, 2009, the long-term running average has been positive for Mission Creek. Overall, we've seen water levels either increase or stabilize in this subbasin. The only area where you're really seeing any decreases are directly adjacent to that recharge facility. And the reason for that is when we put a lot of water in there, the levels go up really fast. As it starts to work its way down valley, the water levels go down really fast. So there's a lot more fluctuation happening right near the facility than there is elsewhere in the basin. So the fact that most of these colors on the right-hand side of the screen are green or blue, again, that is an indicator that we're seeing those positive changes in storage and that this subbasin is being sustainably managed. Next slide, please. Moving on to our projects and management actions and any progress that we've made in the prior water year. Again, there's about 30 or so projects in this plan split into really 5 categories, but we saw some progress in 4 of those, so we'll talk about those right now. In the area of water conservation, similar to Indio Subbasin, we see that continued education and outreach through CV Water Counts, continued participation in our incentive programs. So again, we're talking turf rebate, we're talking high efficiency appliances, sprinklers, and the like. They also mentioned the fact that we have a regional conservation study in progress, which I know Clark's been working very hard on. This is something that we have grant funding for. So this is a grant-funded project. It's meant to be a decision support tool that really takes a look at our turf rebate programs. What's working, what's not, what kind of water savings are we seeing from our customers who have participated in the programs versus those who haven't? What are ways that we can improve our program moving forward into the future? So we're really hopeful that this will be a helpful tool moving forward. It is scheduled to be completed this summer. So right now we're reviewing the draft version of that report and providing comments. In the area of water supply, we're seeing those continued imported water deliveries to Mission Creek Recharge Facility. Again, this year we had a really good delivery, so that's a positive for us. Continued financial planning participation in long-term storage and supply projects. Again, Lake Paris, Sites Reservoir, Delta Conveyance. In the area of water quality protection, there are several septic to sewer projects taking place in Mission Springs service area. Those are in progress, and some, if not all of them, are grant funded as well. So that's really helping to move those projects forward. We're also seeing construction of a new regional water recycling facility in Mission Springs service area. It's another grant-funded project that is scheduled to be completed and in operation later this year. So the current phase of that project will allow them to treat wastewater to secondary treatment and then percolate it back into the aquifer. Future phases of that project include the introduction of tertiary treatment, which would enable them to produce recycled water that could then be used by customers for non-potable purposes. And again, we're also seeing continued coordination on implementing the CVS and MP work plan. There is a category in this plan for Sigma implementation. Most of those projects have to do with these annual reports and 5-year updates, but there is a subsidence study project. So the USGS is in the process of conducting this study, and there were 3 new benchmarks set during the prior water year that they will use to start collecting groundwater or elevation data from the ground surface. Next slide, please. If you'd like more information about the Mission Creek annual report, you can visit that subbasin website at www.missioncreeksubbasinsigma.org. Next slide, please. Are there any questions on the Mission Creek report before we move on to the final
Thank
report?
you. Director Grasha.
Again, thank you for the great report. It helps to fill in the blanks, and I have no questions beyond that. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Bloomer.
No questions, thanks.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
None from me, thanks.
Okay. And Vice President Bowman. All right. We can move on to the last one.
This is the shortest one, so we're on the home stretch right now. We will end this presentation with an overview of the Sigma annual report for the San Gorgonio Pass Subbasin. Next slide. San Gorgonio Pass Subbasin team is comprised of project consultants, Provost and Pritchard, and the San Gorgonio Pass Subbasin GSA's Desert Water Agency, San Gorgonio Pass GSA, which includes the Banning Heights Municipal Water Company, Cabazon Water District, the City of Banning, and San Gorgonio Pass Water Agency, and the Verbinia GSA, which consists of Mission Springs Water District and the San Gorgonio Pass Water Agency. On the map at right, you can see those GSA boundaries. The overwhelming majority of this subbasin falls under San Gorgonio Pass GSA. There's a small area off to the right that is within the Verbinia GSA's jurisdiction. And then Desert Water Agency's jurisdiction is the very eastern edge of this subbasin. Next slide, please. In terms of groundwater elevation data, we did collect data for water level from 9 representative monitoring wells throughout the subbasin for water year 22-23. And similar to the other plans, this data was used to create contour maps, change in storage maps, determine groundwater sustainability. Again, we compared current levels against those minimum thresholds that were established for each of these wells. And in all cases, the current groundwater levels were above those minimum thresholds. So in the map at right, you can see what they consider to be storage areas, and the location of all of those monitoring wells are indicated on that map. Next slide, please. In terms of groundwater production for this subbasin, we saw a total of 8,050 acre-feet produced during water year 22-23. There is a breakdown of which storage unit that production took place in. So Banning Canyon is that upper blue area that you see right there. Other canyons, we're talking about Millard and Potrero Canyon. Those are the upper little fingerlings in green. That number is estimated because it's tribal land, and so they sometimes provide data. This year they did not. So this estimated number is based on prior usage. The Banning storage unit is in pink, pinkish purple on the lower left, and then the overwhelming majority of the subbasin is that Cabazon storage unit in green. Next slide, please. In terms of total water use, again, we saw approximately 8,050 acre-feet of groundwater production. 84% of that went to urban and domestic use, with the remaining 16% going to industrial use. The San Gorgonio Pass subbasin does not have any other water sources other than groundwater production at this time. The only historical surface water supply that they used to divert was from the Whitewater River watershed. Unfortunately, those facilities were damaged during the Apple fire in August of 2020, and they have not been available for use since that time. So right now, it's just groundwater. Next slide, please. In terms of long-term change in storage, we are seeing a decrease in cumulative change in storage at this time. I will note that the models have a longer base period, so they do show fluctuations in wet years versus dry years. And we do expect over time to see more of those fluctuations when we have wet years, 1 or 2 in a row, and then dry years. So you're going to see a little bit more change as we move forward. Next slide, please. In terms of progress made on projects and management actions for water year 22-23, there has been limited progress made, but I'll say the reason for that is because this is a fairly new plan. So the GSP was submitted only the prior water year in 21-22, and it was approved last year. So compared to our 2 other subbasins, this one is very new. San Gorgonio Pass Water Agency and Desert Water are planning participants in those long-term storage and supply projects, Delta Conveyance and Sites Reservoir. Additionally, San Gorgonio Pass Water Agency is evaluating the potential for additional conveyance and recharge facilities that would enable direct deliveries of state water projects to this basin. So they are looking for those future alternative supplies to help supplement the groundwater production. And I will highlight that this subbasin was awarded state funding recently to construct 4 nested monitoring wells at the basin boundaries that will help fill data gaps they identified in their plan. So they are taking some steps forward. And the construction of these 4 wells is expected to be completed in 2025. Next slide, please. If you'd like more information on the San Gorgonio Pass Subbasin Annual Report or the GSP, you can visit their website at www.sgpgsas.org. Next slide. So just to wrap things up, in the Indio and the Mission Creek Subbasin, our groundwater levels, our changes in storage, and the other data that we've collected in our annual reports are showing that we are continuing to meet our sustainability goals and sustainability criteria that we have identified in those alternative plans. In the San Gorgonio Pass Subbasin, our groundwater levels were above the minimum thresholds. And they are, again, taking steps to make progress on their project and management actions. And they did receive that grant funding to construct their additional monitoring wells, which will really help them collect crucial data. That's going to give them a better picture of subbasin inflows and outflows. And the Water Year 22-23 annual reports for Indio, Mission Creek, and San Gorgonio Pass subbasins demonstrate that the projects and management actions as identified in each respective subbasin GSP or alternative plan update are continuing to be implemented. Next slide. Are there any questions on this final report or the report as a whole?
Thank you. Director Grasha, any additional questions?
I have no questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Bloomer.
No questions.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
Just one comment. It seems like San Gorgonio is the problem child. I wonder if you keep us better informed on what's happening there. It's very little of it seems to be in our service area, but what happens in that subbasin affects what happens in Indio subbasin because that water flows through.
That's correct.
So it could be part of a long-term solution for us if they improve, if they get their act together. So I'd like to keep in touch with that. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I will say that we submitted a support letter for their grant application. So we are supporting their efforts to bring those alternate supplies of water into their area.
Vice President Bowman.
Yeah, back to the San Gorgonio. Do we have records of monitoring wells back in like 03, 04, 05, in specific prior to and then after the installation of the water bottling plant that's there?
I believe there may be that information going that far back in their GSP. I'd have to pull it up for you, but I can certainly look into that.
Will any of the new monitoring wells be in the vicinity of that plant?
Again, I don't have that number in front of me, but
Because
I will look
I
into
know
it
that's
for you. I'll
tribal
see what
and
I
that they don't often report what they're pulling out of the ground. And I would personally be curious as to what they are pulling out of the ground and what its effect is to that whole basin.
Okay.
But thank you. Very thorough. Perfect for geeks.
And I do have a question with regard to, you mentioned the Apple Valley fire and not being able to access that supply. Do you have an idea of how much that supply was actually contributing on a regular or long-term basis to the basin?
I don't have that number on me. I know it was small in comparison with the groundwater production that you're seeing. That was still the majority supply. But again, I can pull that information for you
All right.
because they would have that in the GSP.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just to follow up on Secretary Treasurer McKenna's comments, I'm not sure that I would feel comfortable referring to it as the problem child, since this is a fairly new child.
It is a new child, yes.
And we are still trying to raise it in a way that haven't had the opportunity yet to do that. So just recognizing that. Well, thank you very much. Very thorough, very informative, as always. And from that, we can move to item 8D, which is Building Industry Association Board Membership Renewal. Mr. Johnson, bless you.
Oh, bless you. Bless you. Thank you, President Ortega and members of the board. So on May 30th, we met on the executive committee meeting and informed the committee members that we received our renewal for the BIA membership, which is due on September 1st of 2024. This renewal amount is for $853, and it has been included in our 2024-2025 budget. And at this time, this is a discussion item. I believe it will most likely lead to an action item, but staff is recommending that the board consider whether the agency should renew its membership in the BIA. And if the board decides not to renew, consideration should also be made whether the public events list should be revised. And with that, I will hand it back over to the board for discussion and
Okay,
possible action.
thank you. We'll start the discussion with Director Grasha.
Well, I think that since the restrictions that are participation be limited only to Coachella Valley events. I think there's 3 a year, as I recall. And that along with, it hasn't appeared to me to have been beneficial to have that active membership. And you may recall that the vice president of the BIA for our area passed away recently. And it doesn't look like that they're going to be increasing their activity in the desert. They had 2 vice presidents die recently of the same issue. And so it's hard to know what the future is for the organization. But as far as our participation, I don't see that it's a benefit. So I would recommend that we not renew.
Thank you. Director Bloomer?
How long have we been members?
Well, let's see. We recently joined back in 2023. We were members, we stopped in 2010 is when we stopped renewing our membership. Prior to that, I don't have that information.
Yeah.
but-
And was there any was there any downside of not being a member?
I did not see any.
Okay. Then I would agree with Director Grasha that we not renew.
Okay. Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
Yes, I'm not fond of this membership. I think they're a special interest. I think they should be lobbying us, not vice versa. So I would be inclined to vote against this.
Vice President Bowman?
Ditto, ditto, ditto.
All right. So at this point, are we ready to proceed to an action item? Or is that what you were suggesting, Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, I think at this point, you would then consider removing them from our public events list and have a vote on that.
The vote would not be whether or not we renew our membership, but whether they appear on our events list. Is that correct? Is that what you were saying?
Correct. The membership was
Yeah.
part of being
Right.
on the list. So if we remove them from the list, then we would not be renewing our membership.
Okay.
So would that have to be part of the motion, not to renew and to
You can do that.
You could, yeah.
That would be perfect.
All right. So I would make a motion that we not renew our membership and that we remove all references to it from the board events list.
Okay. I have a first from Director Grasha. Look for a second.
I'd be glad to second that.
Okay. Vice President Bowman with the second. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Grasha,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, we can move to item 9, which is our general manager's report. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Ortega. So the first item here is regarding a tour that we held at the Mission Creek Subbasin recharge facilities. And we had that for the Palm Springs Planning Commission. It was a VIP tour. We held that on May 23rd. I've participated along with Assistant General Manager David Tate and our Public Affairs Manager Sochi Pena. We had a staff engineer Maya Lopez and then our operations supervisor Emmanuel Sarpong presented information to the group. Very engaged group, had a lot of questions, and they were interested in learning more about future tours. And at this time, I want to hand this over to Ms. Lort, who wants to give a little more detail about her staff and their involvement in this and other events.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, President Ortega, members of the board. So I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about the Public Affairs and Conservation Department. There's been a lot of changes within that department and also some new members of the staff. And I've invited the team here today. For those of you, thanks, I appreciate that, Clark. In case there are members of the staff that you are unfamiliar with. And so we did break apart the department, and you may already know this, I fully recognize, but I wanted to have the staff an opportunity to come and participate in a full board meeting. But so the department's been broken into the Public Affairs Department as well as the Conservation Department. And in the Conservation Department, we have Clark Elliott as the manager, and then Ernie Valenciano as the Conservation Specialist. And then in the Public Affairs side, we have Sochi Pena as the Public Affairs Manager, and Nisha Ajmani, I hope I pronounced that right, thank you, as our Senior Public Affairs Specialist. And so, as you're familiar, even though we have broken the two departments apart from outreach and conservation, most of their functions still remain the same on the conservation side. Water audits, walkthroughs, assistance with like non-functional turf issues, the new conservation regulations. Those will all be handled on the conservation side, as well as various reporting throughout the year. And on the public affairs side, a lot of the external communication pieces, from newsletters, bill inserts, social media, our annual water quality report, tours, and various public events will be handled within the Public Affairs Department. And so just wanted to have an opportunity to introduce the staff. They are a lot of the external facing on the communications side, and to just take that opportunity. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. Right, so continue,
All
please,
right,
Mr.
I
Johnson.
will continue with the GM report. We held a blood drive on May 29th, and 10 people donated blood. And 2 were first-time donors. So I'm interested, that'd be interesting to know who that was, but I know. It's a great event that we hold here. How many times do we do that, Ms. Hopping? At least 3.
We used to do it quarterly, and then we weren't high enough donation site, so now when they have an opening, they fit us in. So our next one is going to be in August.
Okay. It's still a great event. I encourage anyone who can to donate blood. And of course, there were 11 units collected, which will benefit up to 33 people. Okay. Next item is our system leak. Again, Caballeros we had 19 leaks. Again, as I explained last board meeting, that is just the number of holes total that they find in the pipe when they go out to dig up a leak, and there were 19 over this past 2 weeks. I do have an update on that project. They have passed their pressure tests for the pipe, and they are currently doing the disinfection. They will be flushing the main this week and then taking the back T samples. Hopefully that will all pass without having to rechlorinate. And we anticipate then tying over that main next week, getting rid of the 14-inch that is causing us so much pain. And then they'll do their cleanup work afterwards. So they still have to do their paving and so forth. But fingers crossed that we can tie that main over next week. I should say, I'll also add that the streets in blue, that project is moving along very quickly. That's the Borden project, who is under contract, and they are ahead of schedule. And with that, if we can get those streets off on this list, that's 26 leaks would be removed from from having to repair. So,
What are those guys going to do when these are all fixed?
well, there's other leaks out there, so but
Just just use the
They
phrase,
definitely have their weekends back as assistant general manager.
did you just use the
statement.
phrase ahead of schedule?
Yeah.
Don't hear that much.
Yes. General managers meetings and activities, just like to highlight, again, on the 23rd, we had our Palm Springs Planning Commission VIP tour, and then we also had a finance committee meeting. And on the 23rd, there was the Big Heart Awards dinner that I attended with several board members. I think almost everyone except Director Bowman, who was, I think, in Greece at the time, correct? So, okay. On the 29th, we had an HR committee meeting. The 30th, there was the executive committee meeting, and then, of course, a lot of tribal mediation meetings. And with that, that concludes the GM report.
Thank you. Director Gracia, do you have any questions for General Manager Johnson?
I have no questions and no comments on the
Okay.
report.
Director Bloomer?
No questions or comments, thanks.
All right. Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
None for me, thanks.
All right. Vice President Bowman?
None, thank you.
Okay, none from me. So we'll move to item 10, Directors' Reports on Meetings and Events Attended on behalf of the agency. So if each board member could state which events they attended and the behalf of the agency that were compensable, and let us know the date and the event. So we'll start with you, Director Gracia.
A few on Wednesday, the 5th, or no, that would be the 22nd, so May 22nd. Artificial Intelligence in Water was an event that I attended that was promoted through Aqua. And it was a 4-hour-long meeting where they kind of laid it all out with varying degrees of accuracy, I must say. I think what threw me was one fella inserted that no one will lose their job as a result of AI. And I'm not sure how he justifies that, but in the 4 hours, there was a lot of information that I thought was very valuable for me, enough to be able to say that it's one of those emerging technologies, somebody that, I got my first computer as a hand-me-down from Congresswoman Mary Bono on Christmas. I got her 386 when they upgraded the 4086. And I've watched the evolution of this to the point now where the advances are happening by the day instead of by the year. Yesterday, an AI hallucination occurred in the stock market, devaluing one of America's greatest companies to zero. AI put that out to AI bots throughout the internet, and millions of people were informed that Berkshire Hathaway stock became worth zero. So these are the kind of things, we need to watch out for. You can't let machines take over for humans, at least not yet. But they're doing it, and it's already happening. And one comment that I heard from someone that's very involved in this in terms of, he basically owns one of the biggest companies, was that we're 10 years behind in what we're learning compared to where AI, ChatGPT is in terms of what its capabilities are. We're just beginning to be introduced to what the capabilities are. So that was on the 22nd. I wanted to put it out there that this is going to affect all of us, and we're not sure. Can't be sure how, if it's going to be all positive or not. The Big Heart Awards dinner at Miracle Springs with most of the board, and I must say, of the 3 or 4 that I've attended, it was the nicest Big Heart Awards that I can recall. That was on 5/23. the CVWD meeting on the 28th, and Water Infrastructure Network Summit occurred in Orange County. It was another aqua event that I attended. It was a lunch. Lunch was free. I don't know how they pulled that off, but they did. I guess there were over 300 people in attendance. And the speaker was Senator Alex Padilla, our United States Senator. He likes to remind us he's the senior senator now that he's been a senator for 3 years, I think, which is always fun to hear. Making the trek out for that event was Mayor Quintanilla from Palm Desert, Castillo Estrada, director from Coachella Valley Water District, and Patrick O'Dowd from the Salton Sea Authority. And I would say definitely it was worth the drive out there, and so I'll be putting in for my stipend on that one. It was quite a trek. So thank you. That's it.
All right, thank you. Director Bloomer.
Okay, we had a finance committee meeting on May 23rd, and then later that evening was the Big Heart Awards. Oh, and also a CVWD DWA meeting in between. And then an HR meeting, committee meeting on Wednesday, May 29th. And then just yesterday, June 4th, was a tribal mediation meeting. And that is it.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
I also had the Finance Committee meeting, went to Desert Hot Springs Big Heart Awards, enjoyed that event. And a non-compensable meeting, I went to the Mission Springs Water District Water Talk on Chromium 6. And I've been a critic of theirs in the past, but I think they're headed in the right direction this time. I was reassured by the steps they're taking to deal with Chromium 6, which is a significant problem in our area, the area I live in. So kudos to them for that.
Thank you. Vice President Bowman.
Yes, I came home from vacation to have 2 days in a row of working for the district here. HR committee on the 29th, and the executive committee on the 30th, and then on Monday, this past Monday, our principals meeting. Non-compensable, I did also attend the MSWD, and I was very impressed. They're taking care of business, and we're happy that they're doing that on Chrome 6. They have to, by the way, by law. And on the 30th, I attended something that was pretty cool. Desert Hot Springs, I sat on the Public Safety Commission for 11 years, and public safety, EMS, medical service, and fire are critical. And we are getting a station out on the east end of town, Station 98. And it was a real joy to go there to see this groundbreaking, because we've been needing the east end of town covered. And hopefully in 1 year, they said we'll have fire occupants there. Is that the right way to say it? Fire officers, or firemen, firewomen, fire people. Firefighters. Thank you, thank you. And EMS people, so I was it was just a great day. And I had a good vacation, and I'm glad to be home.
All right, welcome back. So for me, I also attended the Big Hearts event. That was the second time I've attended. The previous time was about 2 years ago. I have to say it was a much improved event, in my opinion, much more positive. I think the food was also a little bit better. And a lot more enjoyable as an event overall. And then this week, or yesterday, I guess it was Monday, the 3rd, I did the security training that's required of directors and employees. And that's it for me as far as outside meetings and events. So with that, we can move to item 10. Item 11, director's comments and requests, and we'll start with Director Grasha.
Thank you. I have no comments or requests.
All right, thank you. Director Bloomer.
Nothing for me, thanks.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
Small comment, at the water talk with Mission Springs, we had 3 directors there, and they had 2. So 1 point to us.
Okay. Vice President Bowman,
Nothing, just glad to be home.
thank you. And I have nothing else to comment on or request, so with that, we could move to closed session. I see that it's 10:20, so at 10:30, if the directors can meet in the boardroom. Thank you to the members of the public that were here today. We will be coming back at the end of closed session to close the meeting. All right, so item number 13 on today's agenda is we're reconvening into open session. I can tell you that we have no reportable action was taken while we were in closed session. And with that, we can adjourn the meeting until next 2 weeks from now. Thank you.